I sold the company I built with my own hands for $58 million and took my son and his wife out to celebrate. They smiled, toasted me, and acted proud until a security guard leaned in and quietly warned me my son had tampered with my drink. I didn't confront him. I paid the bill, walked out calmly, and that single decision changed his entire future. Before I continue, do me a small favor. Follow this channel and share where you're watching from. Stories like this only travel when people who've lived through betrayal speak up. I was 68 when I sold the company I had built from nothing for $58 million. Not inherited, not gifted. Built mile by mile, contract by contract, mistake by mistake. I started with one second-hand truck and an idea nobody believed in, including the bank that rejected my first loan application 3 times. I named the company Redwood Freight Solutions, after the trees I used to pass on my early morning routes. Tall, quiet, unbreakable. I wanted my business to be the same. When the deal finally closed, the wire confirmation hit my account with a number so large it didn't feel real. $58 million. People think a moment like that feels explosive. Joy, pride, triumph. But what I felt was stillness. The kind that comes when a man knows a chapter has ended and another one, undefined and dangerous, is about to begin. My son, Ethan, insisted we celebrate. He chose a restaurant, LeClaire, the kind of place where the chairs are heavier than most people's cars and the silence itself feels expensive. He brought his wife, Lena, dressed in confidence and diamonds that I knew were still being paid off. They arrived smiling, arms linked, playing the role of the devoted couple perfectly. Ethan lifted his glass first. "To my father," he said loudly enough for nearby tables to hear. A man who built everything from the ground up. $58 million. Incredible. People glanced over. Nods of admiration. The performance worked. I smiled back, slow and measured, and raised my glass of cranberry juice. My doctor had banned alcohol after my last cardiac scare. "Still alive is a goal," he'd said. I intended to keep it that way. Lena leaned forward, her hand brushing mine for half a second. "Now you can finally relax," she said softly. "We'll take care of things from here." The words sounded kind. They weren't. I had heard that sentence before, different versions of it, wrapped in concern and false warmth. My late wife, Marianne, had warned me years ago, "He doesn't see you as a father anymore. He sees you as a vault." I hadn't wanted to believe her. Sitting there at that table, watching my son's eyes track the room like he already owned it, I knew she had been right. They talked about plans as if the money were already theirs. Travel, property, simplify my assets. Ethan asked casually whether I'd finalized my will yet. He asked it the way someone asks about the weather. After dinner, the pianist began a slow song. Ethan stood and pulled Lena toward the dance floor, smiling back at me as if I were the audience to his life. I watched them sway together, perfectly rehearsed. From across the room, they looked happy. I knew better. I had paid off Ethan's debts more than once. I had co-signed loans I shouldn't have. Their life was polished on the outside and hollow underneath. That was when the security guard approached. He was older, steady, the kind of man who had learned to notice details because once, long ago, missing them had cost him something. He leaned in close, his voice low. "Sir," he said, "I don't want to alarm you, but I was near the bar earlier. I saw your son pour something from a small vial into your drink. He thought no one was watching." Time stopped. The music faded. The room narrowed. I stared down at my glass. Deep red, innocent-looking, lethal. I didn't gasp. I didn't shout. Decades of building a business had taught me one thing above all else. Never show your hand when the stakes are life and death. I nodded once. That was all. The guard understood. He disappeared without another word, leaving me alone with the truth I had refused to see for years. My son wasn't waiting for my legacy. He was tired of waiting for me to die. When Ethan and Lena returned to the table, laughing, I became an actor in my own survival. I clutched my chest, let my face pale, murmured about indigestion. I insisted on leaving alone. When my glass tipped and spilled across the white tablecloth like blood, no one questioned it. I slipped the soaked napkin into my coat pocket. Evidence. 15 minutes later, I was in the back of the car, the city lights blurring past, my heart pounding not with fear, but with clarity. The celebration hadn't been a celebration. It had been an execution. And my son had failed. I didn't go home. That was the first decision I made after the car dropped me off 3 blocks away from my house. Home was full of photographs. Birthdays, graduations, a smiling boy perched on my shoulders, memories that would weaken my resolve before I had even understood what I was dealing with. I needed distance. I needed facts. And above all, I needed proof that what I had just been told wasn't a nightmare stitched together by paranoia and age. The night air was sharp as I walked toward the medical district, the napkin heavy in my coat pocket. Every step felt deliberate, measured. I had spent 4 decades making decisions under pressure, missed shipments, broken contracts, lawsuits that could have buried my company before it ever grew legs. This was different. This wasn't business. This was blood. I entered a private diagnostic lab I knew well. Years ago, Redwood Freight had contracted with them for employee screenings. Quiet, discreet, expensive. Exactly what I needed now. The technician barely blinked when I placed a sealed napkin on the counter. Full toxicology, I said. Everything. Tonight. He nodded. Money talked. Silence followed. I left and walked 2 blocks to an all-night diner. The kind with cracked vinyl seats and coffee that tasted like it had been burned twice. I ordered a cup and never touched it. My hands were steady, but my thoughts weren't. I replayed the night in my head. Ethan's toast. Lena's touch. The question about my will. The vial. How long had this been planned? When my phone buzzed, my heart slammed once. Hard. But it wasn't Ethan. It was an encrypted email from the lab. I opened it slowly. The summary was short. Brutal. The substance detected was a beta blocker. A dosage far beyond therapeutic levels. For someone with my cardiac history, it would have induced a fatal heart event within hours. One that would look completely natural. A heart attack. No struggle, no suspicion, no autopsy questions. My son hadn't just tried to hurt me. He had planned my death. I closed the phone and stared out the diner window as the city began to lighten with the first hints of dawn. The grief didn't come right away. Neither did anger. What came was something colder, sharper, understanding. This hadn't been about impatience. It had been about desperation. And desperation leaves footprints. I knew exactly who to call. By the time the sun rose fully, I was sitting in the corner office of Margaret Hale. The lawyer who had been with me since Redwood was nothing but a name scribbled on a notepad. She listened without interrupting, her face hardening with every sentence. When I showed her the report, she exhaled slowly. "This is attempted murder," she said. "Premeditated. With this, we could have him arrested today." I shook my head. "No police. Not yet." She stared at me. "Why?" "Because prison is an ending," I said, "and I need a reckoning." Margaret studied me for a long moment. She knew that tone. It was the same one I used before dismantling a hostile takeover or walking away from a deal that would poison everything it touched. "What do you want?" she asked. "I want him to believe he's won," I said. "Long enough for the truth to take everything from him." Her lips pressed into a thin line. Then, slowly, she nodded. "All right," she said. "Then we do this clean. Quiet. And permanent." That morning, we set things in motion. Investigators, former financial auditors and compliance specialists, began pulling apart Ethan and Lena's life thread by thread. Accounts, loans, property records, every signature they'd ever placed on paper. Nothing would stay hidden. Meanwhile, I played my role. When Ethan called later that day, his voice was thick with false concern. "Dad, you scared us last night," he said. "Are you okay?" "Just indigestion," I replied softly. "Doctor says my heart's fine. Just need rest." I could almost hear the relief spill through the phone. "Thank God," he said. "We were so worried." I smiled to myself. That night, lie in a hotel room with the curtains drawn, I thought of Mary Ann. Of all the times she had looked at our son with worry instead of pride, I had ignored it because it hurt too much to believe. I wouldn't ignore it anymore. By the end of the week, Margaret's team had enough information to make my stomach turn. Ethan and Lena were drowning. Credit cards maxed out. Mortgages behind. Cars leased on borrowed money. Private loans from people who didn't send polite reminders when payments were missed. More than $2 million in total debt. The $58 million wasn't a bonus to them. It was a lifeline, and they had been willing to kill for it. That realization burned away the last of my hesitation. This wasn't about teaching a lesson. This was about survival, mine, and the integrity of everything I had built. I authorized the next step. We let Ethan believe a family trust was coming. A big one. Margaret made sure the word irrevocable floated into conversation, that it sounded ironclad, permanent, safe. Greed did the rest. Ethan's calls became warmer, kinder. He asked about my health. He asked how I was sleeping. He asked when we might meet to talk about the future. I answered every call. I smiled through every lie. Because while he thought the inheritance was within reach, the ground beneath him was already starting to crack. And he had no idea that the man he tried to bury was now carefully, patiently, dismantling the world he stood on. By the second week, Ethan stopped pretending. The concern in his voice hardened into calculation. Every call followed the same rhythm. First my health, then my mood, then, inevitably, the trust. He never asked directly, not outright. He circled it the way a predator circles prey, testing for weakness, waiting for the moment to strike. I let him circle. Margaret says these things take time. I told him one afternoon, my voice slow, tired on purpose. Setting it up properly matters. I don't want mistakes. That makes sense, he replied quickly. Too quickly. You worked too hard for this to rush it. Worked too hard. The words would have felt like praise once. Now they sounded like an epitaph. While Ethan rehearsed affection, Margaret's team worked silently. They traced shell companies, uncovered forged documents, and reconstructed timelines with surgical precision. What they found went beyond debt and greed. It revealed intent. 3 months before the restaurant dinner, Ethan had filed a medical power of attorney, one I never signed. It gave him full access to my records, authority to make decisions if I became incapacitated. It had been quietly accepted by the hospital system. No one questioned it. The signature was good. Almost perfect. Almost. I stared at the copy for a long time, my name curled in familiar strokes that weren't mine. It felt like looking at my own reflection distorted in broken glass. Margaret didn't soften it. He planned this, she said. He studied you. She slid another report across the table. Search histories. Burner phones. Public computers. How to induce heart attack naturally. Lethal dosage beta blockers elderly male. Will autopsy detect overdose? Each line was another nail. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. Any lingering hope died quietly in that room. That night, I walked through my house for the first time since the dinner. I turned on no lights. The shadows were enough. My fingers brushed the frames on the wall. Marianne laughing at the beach, Ethan on his first day of school, all three of us standing proudly in front of First Redwood Depot. I realized something then. They weren't just trying to kill me. They were erasing me, selling my wife's art collection behind my back, calling galleries, speaking about my health as if I were already gone. They were liquidating memory, turning love into leverage. That betrayal cut deeper than the poison ever could. The next morning, I made a decision Margaret hadn't anticipated. We move the money now, I said. She looked up sharply. Before the meeting? Before everything. By the end of the day, the $58 million was gone. Not hidden, not transferred to another holding account, but permanently placed beyond their reach. An irrevocable foundation bearing Marianne's name. Funding artists. Sanctuaries. Causes she believed in. No inheritance. No trust. No second chances. Only truth. We scheduled the meeting anyway. Ethan and Lena arrived glowing. He wore a new suit. She wore a dress that screamed confidence. They looked like people who believed the future had already been won. They hugged me. I stood still. Margaret laid the folders out slowly, one by one, letting the weight of them settle. First, the toxicology report, then the debt, then the forged power of attorney, then the search history. Each page peeled away a layer of illusion. Lena's face drained of color. Ethan's jaw clenched, his eyes darting between documents like a trapped animal searching for an exit. "There's no trust," I said calmly. "There never was." Silence fell thick and absolute. "The money is gone," I continued. "Not spent. Not hidden. Gone." Margaret explained the foundation, the finality, the legality. Ethan lunged to his feet. "You can't do this." "I already did." He turned on Lena, fury cracking through panic. She started to cry. Not softly, loudly, desperately. Then I gave them the choice. Prison or disappearance. Sign everything over. Walk away with nothing. No claims. No contact. No return. If they refused, everything went to the authorities. Every document. Every search. Every forged signature. The pen trembled in Ethan's hand as he signed. Lena followed, tears smearing ink across the page. When they left, they didn't look back. I stayed seated long after the door closed, feeling nothing like victory, only an immense, quiet finality. Weeks later, I stood in a small gallery watching young artists speak about their work. Marianne's foundation had already begun to breathe life into something new. I understood then what legacy really was. Not what you leave to your children, but what you refuse to let them destroy. After they walked out of that conference room, the city kept moving as if nothing extraordinary had happened. Cars flowed below the glass tower. Phones rang. Deals were made. Somewhere, people were celebrating, arguing, falling in love. And yet for me, an entire lifetime had ended in the soft click of a closing door. Margaret gathered the signed papers without a word. She didn't congratulate me. She didn't offer comfort. She understood that what had just occurred wasn't a victory. It was an amputation necessary, precise, and permanently life-altering. "Do you want me to escort them out of the building?" she asked quietly. "No," I said. "Let them find their own way." That mattered. For the first time in their adult lives, there would be no driver waiting, no assistant smoothing things over, no safety net hidden beneath the fall. Just gravity. I left the building alone. The elevator ride down felt longer than usual. Each floor ticked by like a metronome, marking time I would never get back. When the doors opened, the late afternoon air hit my face, warm and unremarkable. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment, unsure where to go next. For 40 years, my life had been defined by responsibility, first to a company, then to a family, then to a son who never learned the difference between support and entitlement. Now there was only space. Too much of it. I didn't go home. Instead, I walked, block after block, past places that had once meant something to me. The old cafe where Marianne and I used to sit on Sunday mornings. The park where Ethan learned to ride a bike, wobbling and laughing until he scraped his knee and ran crying into my arms. Memory pressed in from every direction, but it no longer had teeth. The pain was there, yes, but it was clean now, no longer infected by hope. That evening, my phone rang. I knew who it would be before I looked. Lena. I let it ring. It rang again. Then again. Finally, a message appeared. "Please, just let me explain." I deleted it. Minutes later, another. "Ethan is losing it. We have nowhere to go." I turned the phone face down. An hour passed. Then another. When I finally checked again, the caller ID showed a different name. My sister. Her voice cracked the moment I answered. "What did you do?" Word traveled fast in certain circles. Not the truth, never the truth, but fragments of it. Panic has a way of leaking through walls. "I did what I had to," I said. She was silent for a long moment. "They're saying you disowned him." "No," I replied calmly. "I stopped enabling him." "That's still your son?" "Yes," I said, "and I'm still his father. That's why I didn't let him kill me." The line went quiet. "I didn't know," she finally whispered. "Neither did I said and meant it. That night, I slept better than I had in years. Not peacefully, not easily, but honestly. The days that followed were strange in their simplicity. No crisis calls. No financial emergencies. No veiled questions about what happens next. My calendar, once packed with obligations, was suddenly empty, so I filled it differently. I met with the board of the foundation, walked through the first grant proposals, listened as young artists explained what a single opportunity could mean for their lives. One woman cried while thanking me. I felt uncomfortable with that. Gratitude had never sat well on my shoulders, but I understood it wasn't for me. It was for Marianne, for the belief that creation mattered. In the quiet moments, doubt tried to creep in. At night, especially, I would lie awake and imagine Ethan alone somewhere, furious, broken, blaming me for everything. I wondered if I had gone too far, if there had been another way, a softer ending. Then I remembered the vial, the forged signature, the search history, and the doubt evaporated. 2 weeks later, Margaret called. They violated the agreement, she said. I closed my eyes. How? They tried to contact a board member, indirectly, fishing for sympathy. There's no legal breach yet, but it's close. I exhaled slowly. No more warnings. I didn't think you'd want one. I don't. Another pause. There's something else. She hesitated, which meant it mattered. They're being investigated already. Not because of you, because of the lenders. The private ones. The kind that don't wait. I felt no satisfaction hearing that. Only inevitability. Do I need to do anything? I asked. No, she said. In fact, the less you do, the safer you are. When the call ended, I sat in my study for a long time, staring at the shelves Marianne once filled with books and sketches. I realized then that walking away wasn't an act of cruelty. It was an act of survival. A month passed. Then, too, one afternoon, as I was leaving the gallery, a man approached me, mid-30s, nervous, respectful. I'm sorry to bother you, he said. I just want to say the grant changed everything for me. I shook his hand, nodded, listened. He didn't know my story. Didn't need to. He only knew that someone he'd never met had given him a chance. That felt like enough. The past, however, wasn't quite finished with me. It came back on a rainy Tuesday morning, in the form of a single envelope slipped under my door. No return address. Inside was a photograph. Ethan, sitting on the steps of what looked like a cheap motel, unshaven, hollow-eyed, smaller somehow. On the back, 3 words were written in shaky ink. You won. I stared at it for a long time. Then I turned the photo over and slid it back into the envelope. I didn't respond, because this was never about winning. It was about ending a lie. And some endings, no matter how painful, are the only way anything true can begin. The photograph stayed on my desk for 3 days. I didn't hide it. I didn't frame it. I didn't tear it up either. It sat there beside my reading glasses, face down, like an unanswered question that refused to disappear simply because I chose silence. On the 4th morning, I slid it into the bottom drawer and locked it away, not out of anger, out of clarity. I had learned something important in the weeks since the meeting. Closure is not something you give to the people who hurt you. It's something you take for yourself. Life settled into a new rhythm after that. Mornings began quietly, with coffee on the porch and the sound of birds I hadn't noticed before. Afternoons were spent with the foundation, meetings, calls, planning programs that felt constructive instead of draining. Evenings belonged to memory, but no longer the sharp, bleeding kind. Softer memories. Marianne's laugh, the way she used to hum while painting, the look she gave me when she knew I was worrying too much. I stopped asking myself what Ethan was doing. That wasn't my burden anymore. But the world has a way of circling back, even when you've drawn your lines carefully. It happened at the grocery store of all places. I was standing in the produce aisle comparing apples when I heard my name spoken hesitantly behind me. Sir, I turned. The man couldn't have been older than 30. Thin, nervous. His jacket was too big, his eyes too alert, the look of someone who slept lightly and trusted no one. I'm sorry, he said quickly. I know this is strange. I work for your son. The word son still landed hard, but I kept my face neutral. Briefly, he added, At the logistics firm. Before everything. I nodded once. All right. He swallowed. I just wanted to say, I quit. A lot of us did. Things weren't right there. The books, the pressure, the lies. We didn't know about everything. But we knew enough. I studied him for a moment, then gestured toward the checkout lanes. Walk with me. We paid separately and stepped outside into the afternoon sun. He looked relieved I hadn't brushed him off. He talked about you, the man said. A lot. Not kindly. I assumed as much. He used to say you didn't understand the modern world, that you were out of touch, that once you were gone, everything would finally work. I stopped walking. The man froze, clearly worried he'd said too much. It's all right, I said quietly. I already knew. He hesitated, then continued. The night after the meeting, the day everything collapsed, he came to the office, not to work, just to yell, to demand answers no one had. Security walked him out. I thanked the man for telling me and wished him well. He left quickly, like someone unburdened but unsure what came next. I stood there alone for a long time. That night, I dreamed of Ethan as a boy again, not the angry man, not the schemer. The child with scraped knees and mismatched socks who used to fall asleep on my shoulder during long drives. I woke with tears on my face and a strange calm in my chest. Grief, I realized, doesn't end. It evolves. 2 months later, the call finally came. Not from Ethan. From Lena. Her voice was thinner than I remembered, stripped of its old confidence. I know I'm not supposed to call, she said. I know the agreement. You do, I replied. I just needed to tell you something. She rushed on. Then I'll go. I said nothing. He blames you for everything, she said. But he's wrong. I know that now. I pushed him. I encouraged it. I told him you owed us. That was just money. I didn't think. Her voice broke. I didn't think it would go that far. I closed my eyes. He's not well, she continued. He hasn't been for a long time. He won't listen to anyone. Not even me. That's not my responsibility, I said gently. I know, she whispered. I just wanted you to hear it from me. I'm leaving. Going back to my sister's. Starting over. That would be wise. There was a pause. Then softly, I'm sorry. For Marianne's things. For all of it. The apology didn't heal anything. But it mattered that it existed. Goodbye, Lena, I said. When the line went dead, I sat very still, letting the quiet settle around me. The Foundation's first major exhibition opened that same week. The gallery buzzed with energy, young artists, patrons, press. I watched from the back as a reporter asked one of the painters what the grant meant to her. It meant someone believed in me before I believed in myself, she said. That sentence stayed with me. Belief. I had given Ethan belief for decades. Belief without boundaries. Belief without consequence. And it had almost cost me my life. I understood now that belief, like money, must be earned and managed carefully. Late one evening, Margaret joined me for a drink after a board meeting. You did the right thing, she said, as if reading my thoughts. I know, I replied. That doesn't make it easy. She nodded. Nothing worth doing ever is. She hesitated. There's one more loose end. I looked at her. The hospital. The forged power of attorney. We can have it permanently flagged. Your records locked down. Alert set. Do it, I said without hesitation. And Jack, she added gently, if you ever want to revisit things, legally, emotionally, I'm here. I smiled faintly. I appreciate that, but some doors are meant to stay closed. Winter arrived quietly. The house felt different now. Lighter. Not empty, never empty, but free of tension. I found myself humming while cooking, taking longer walks, sleeping without medication for the first time in years. One afternoon, as snow dusted the ground, I opened the bottom drawer and took out the photograph again. Ethan still looked lost in it. I studied his face, searching for something, remorse, maybe, or recognition. I didn't find it. I slid the photo back and locked the drawer for the final time. Not because I hated him. Because loving him no longer meant sacrificing myself. I had built a company from nothing. I had loved a woman with my whole soul. I had raised a child as best I knew how. And when that child became a threat, I chose life. That choice didn't make me cruel. It made me honest. And honesty, I had learned at 68 years old, is the most expensive thing in the world. Because it costs you everything that isn't real. By spring, the city had forgotten my story. That was the strange thing about collapse. No matter how dramatic it feels on the inside, the world absorbs it and moves on. New headlines replace old ones. New scandals bury yesterday's betrayals. What once felt seismic becomes background noise. I welcome that anonymity. The foundation grew quietly, not aggressively, not with fanfare. Carefully, deliberately, we funded studios instead of spectacles, apprenticeships instead of galas. I attended openings without announcing myself. I like listening more than speaking now. One afternoon, while reviewing grant applications, I came across a name that made my chest tighten. Ethan Calloway. Not my son. Another young man. Same first name. Similar age. His proposal was simple. Too simple for most boards to take seriously. He wanted to rebuild an abandoned warehouse into a shared workspace for artists who couldn't afford rent. No flashy projections. No grand promises. Just a plan, a budget, and a letter explaining why the space mattered. I read his letter twice. He wrote about failure, about sleeping in his car, about losing people who believed in him because he believed in himself too much, too soon. He didn't ask for pity. He asked for a chance. I approved the grant without hesitation. That decision unsettled me, not because it reminded me of my son, but because it reminded me of who my son could have been if he had ever learned humility. The past has a way of resurfacing when you least expect it. It came back one morning in the form of a news alert I didn't mean to open. Former tech executive arrested in financial fraud case. I recognized the face immediately. Not Ethan. Lena. The article was clinical. Charges. Misrepresentation. Attempted asset concealment. Cooperation agreements. Her name was listed alongside several others. My son's was mentioned only once, buried deep in the text. Questioned but not charged at this time. I closed the article. I felt no relief, no satisfaction, only confirmation. That night, my phone rang again. A number I didn't recognize. I let it go to voicemail. Dad. The word alone made my hands tremble. It's me, Ethan said. His voice sounded older. Not stronger, just worn thin. I don't know if you'll listen to this. I don't know if you should, but I need to say it anyway. I didn't delete the message. I used to think you were weak, he continued. That you let people walk over you. That you didn't understand how the world worked anymore. I thought money proved something. That it made me better than you. He paused. I was wrong. The silence stretched long enough that I wondered if the message had ended. I didn't want to hurt you, he said finally. I just didn't think about you at all. And I think that might be worse. I closed my eyes. I don't expect forgiveness, he added quickly. I don't deserve it. I need you to know I see it now. What I did, what I became. The message ended abruptly. No request, no plea, just words left hanging in the air like a confession, whispered into an empty room. I didn't call him back, but I didn't erase the message either. Some truths don't require a response. They only require acknowledgement. Weeks passed. Summer arrived gently, filling the house with light and warmth. I found myself working in the garden Marianne once loved, turning soil, planting things that would take time to grow. I understood the appeal now. Growth that couldn't be rushed. Results that couldn't be bought. Margaret visited one afternoon, unannounced. You're quieter, she observed, sitting across from me on the porch. I'm done shouting, I replied. She smiled faintly. There's something you should know. I waited. The DA closed the file, she said. Not enough to prosecute without you. They wanted your testimony. And I told them you wouldn't be participating. I nodded. Thank you. She hesitated. That doesn't mean what he did disappears. It just means the world won't see it the way you did. That's all right, I said. I didn't need an audience. Margaret studied me for a long moment. Most people in your position would have wanted blood. I wanted peace. That's rarer. Later that evening, I played one of Marianne's old records for the first time in years. Jazz. Soft. Familiar. I let it fill the room while I poured myself a glass of wine. My doctor had finally approved it again. I raised a glass toward her photograph. I'm still here, I said quietly. And for the first time, I believe she would have approved of how I stayed. The Foundation hosted another exhibition in late summer. This one was louder, bolder. The artists had found confidence. The space buzzed with laughter and debate. I stood near the entrance, content to observe. That was when I saw him. Ethan, my son. He stood just inside the door, uncertain, hands clasped in front of him like a boy waiting to be called into a principal's office. He looked thinner, less polished. Real. I didn't move. Neither did he. For a long moment, we simply existed in the same space, breathing the same air, separated by years of silence and one irreversible truth. Finally, he spoke. I didn't know you'd be here, he said. I didn't know you'd come, I replied. He nodded. I almost didn't. We stood side by side, watching a young woman explain her sculpture to a small group. She's talented, he said. She is, I agreed. Another pause. I'm working construction now, he said suddenly, as if needing to fill the silence. Nothing fancy. Demolition mostly. I met his eyes. That's honest work. He swallowed. I'm learning. I believed him. We didn't talk long. We didn't need to. There were no apologies exchanged, no promises made. Just two men standing in the aftermath of something neither could undo. Before he left, he turned to me. I don't expect anything from you, he said. But thank you for not destroying me when you could have. I watched him walk away. I felt something loosen in my chest. Not forgiveness, not yet, but release. That night, I slept deeply. Not because the past had been resolved, but because it no longer controlled me. I had built a future from the wreckage. I had chosen truth over comfort, purpose over pride. And while the scars remained, they no longer defined the shape of my life. They were just part of the structure, evidence of stress endured, survived, and integrated into something stronger. After that night at the gallery, something subtle but irreversible shifted inside me. Not hope, not forgiveness. Something quieter. Acceptance. I didn't see Ethan again for weeks. We didn't text. We didn't call. The absence felt intentional on both sides, like two people finally respecting the weight of distance instead of trying to bridge it too quickly and collapse under the strain. I learned that space, when chosen deliberately, can be a form of care. Autumn arrived slowly, painting the city in amber and rust. The Foundation entered a new phase, less reactive, more rooted. Program stabilized. Artists returned not just with gratitude, but with results. Studios filled. Apprentices found mentors. Work began to outlive the funding that started it. That mattered to me. One afternoon, I received a handwritten letter. No return address. The envelope was plain, the handwriting uneven. I knew who it was before I opened it. It wasn't long. No justifications. No explanations. Just a description of days. Ethan wrote about waking before dawn to pour concrete, about the ache in his hands, about learning how to measure twice instead of assuming. He wrote about a foreman who didn't care who his father was or what his last name used to mean. He didn't ask for anything. He didn't even say sorry again. He just wrote, I'm trying to build something that doesn't collapse when no one's watching. I folded the letter carefully and placed it beside Marianne's journal in the drawer. Some things belong together. That winter was the coldest I could remember, but my house felt warmer than it had in years. Friends visited. Old colleagues stopped by, not to ask for favors, but to talk, to reconnect, to remember a version of me I had lost while trying to be everything for everyone else. I found myself laughing more easily, sleeping more deeply, living more honestly. On a quiet Sunday morning, I visited the cemetery for the first time since the restaurant night. I brought no flowers, just time. I sat beside Mary Ann Stone and talked to her the way I used to talk to her in the evenings. About nothing and everything. About the gallery. About the foundation. About the way silence had become something I trusted instead of feared. And finally, about Ethan. I didn't save him, I said softly, but I didn't destroy him either. The wind moved gently through the trees. I think that was a line. I added, the one I kept missing before. I stayed there until the sun dipped low and the cold crept into my bones. As I stood to leave, I felt something I hadn't expected. Gratitude. Not for the pain. Never for that. But for the clarity it had forced upon me. Pain, when survived, can become a teacher. But only if you refuse to turn it into a weapon. Late that winter, the foundation received its first major private donation from someone who had attended one of our exhibitions anonymously. They left a note with the check. This work matters. Please keep it honest. I pinned the note above my desk. Honest. That was the word that defined everything now. Spring returned, tentative at first, then confident. The garden bloomed again. I planted new roses where old ones had died, not as replacements, but as continuations. One afternoon, while pruning, I saw Ethan walking up the path. Not hesitantly, not arrogantly, just carefully. I didn't know if he'd want me here, he said. I didn't know either, I replied. He smiled faintly, but I thought I should try. We sat on the porch. No audience, no expectations. He told me about his work. I told him about the foundation. We spoke like equals. Not father and son try to reclaim lost roles, but two men acknowledging shared history and separate responsibility. I understand now, he said quietly, why you didn't call the police. I looked at him. You didn't spare me, he continued. You spared yourself. And somehow that gave me a chance. I nodded. That was the idea. He didn't stay long. He never did. But when he left, I noticed something new. He walked away without looking back. That told me more than any apology ever could. As summer approached again, I realized something important. This story, my story, was never about wealth or betrayal or even survival. It was about boundaries, about learning that love without limits isn't love. It's surrender. And that dignity, once reclaimed, must be defended not with force, but with consistency. I had built bridges. I had built companies. But the hardest structure I ever built was the one that finally separated who I was from what others wanted me to be. That structure held, and it would continue to hold, quietly, steadily, long after this chapter ended. Time did what it always does. It kept moving, indifferent to whether anyone felt ready. By late summer, my days had settled into something close to contentment. Not happiness in the careless sense, but balance. The kind you earn after everything unnecessary has been stripped away. I no longer measure my worth by productivity or legacy or what I could provide for others. I measure it by how I slept, how I breathed, how honest I felt when I looked at myself in the mirror each morning. That honesty had cost me dearly, but it had also given me something rare. Peace without illusion. Ethan didn't come often. When he did, it was never announced. No calls ahead. No expectations. Sometimes he'd help me fix a fence or move something heavy in the garage. Sometimes he'd just sit on the porch, hands wrapped around a mug of coffee, staring out at nothing in particular. We didn't talk about the past unless it surfaced naturally. And when it did, we didn't argue about it. That was the difference. One afternoon, as cicadas droned in the heat, he asked me something I hadn't expected. Did you ever regret having me? The question was simple, but it carried decades of weight. I didn't answer right away. No, I said finally. I regretted not knowing when to stop protecting you from consequences. He nodded, as if he'd already suspected that was the answer. I thought love meant being indispensable, he said quietly. I thought if I never needed anyone, I'd be safe. I looked at him, really looked. You weren't afraid of needing people. I said, you were afraid of being ordinary. That landed. He didn't argue. We sat in silence for a long time after that. The kind that doesn't feel empty. The kind that feels earned. A week later, the foundation faced its first real crisis. A major donor, New money, flashy money, wanted influence, naming rights, control over which artists were funded, conditions that smelled too much like the old world I'd left behind. The board was divided. The money would allow us to expand quickly, build more spaces, fund more programs. But it came with strings. I listened to everyone, took notes, asked questions. Then I said no. The room went quiet. We can grow slower, I said, or we can rot faster. I've seen what happens when money dictates values. I won't build that again. Some board members resigned that day. Others stayed. The foundation survived. And something unexpected happened in the weeks that followed. Smaller donors stepped in. Quiet ones. People who believed in the work, not the prestige. The loss turned into a filter, separating those who wanted control from those who wanted contribution. I recognized the pattern. It was the same lesson repeated. Boundaries don't shrink you. They define you. That autumn, I received an invitation I hadn't asked for. A lecture series at a local university. They wanted me to speak, not about wealth or success, but about ethical leadership, about knowing when to walk away. I almost declined. Then I thought about Ethan, about the young artists, about how silence, when shared intentionally, can become guidance. So I accepted. The auditorium wasn't full. No standing ovation. No cameras. Just students. I didn't tell them my story. Not fully. I spoke in principles, not confessions. I told them that success without accountability is just delayed failure. That loyalty bought is not loyalty at all. That if you never say no, someone else will eventually say for you, and it will hurt more. At the end, a student raised her hand. How do you know when it's too late to fix a mistake? I smiled gently. When you stop asking that question, I said, as long as you're still asking, it isn't too late. Afterward, Ethan waited for me outside. You were good, he said. I was honest. I replied. He hesitated. That's harder. Yes, I said, but it lasts longer. Winter crept in again, quieter this time. One evening, as snow fell softly outside, I found myself opening Mary Ann's journal. I hadn't read it in years. Not because it was painful, but because it felt sacred. I turned to a page I didn't remember. Her handwriting slanted slightly, as if written in haste. If you're reading this, it means I was right to worry and wrong to stay silent. Love him, Jack, but don't lose yourself trying to save him. If the day comes when you have to choose life. I closed the book. My hands were shaking. She had known, not the details, not the outcome, but the shape of it. I slept deeply that night, the kind of sleep that feels like forgiveness, not given but received. By spring, Ethan had moved into a small apartment near his work site. No views, no luxury, just space that belonged to him. He invited me once. I went. We ate takeout on mismatched chairs. It was perfect. I don't know where this ends, he said at one point. You don't need to, I replied. Just know where you are. He smiled. A real one. The foundation celebrated its second anniversary quietly. No gala, no speeches, just a gathering of artists and volunteers in one of the renovated warehouses. Music echoed off brick walls. Paint stained the floors. Laughter filled the air. I stood near the back, unnoticed, and I was grateful for that. I realized then that my life had come full circle. I had started with nothing, built something, lost almost everything that mattered, and ended up with something far more solid than money or reputation. Integrity, not the kind you announce, the kind you live. As the evening wound down, Ethan stood beside me, watching the crowd. You know, he said, for a long time, I thought this story would end with one of us broken. I looked at him. It did. He nodded, but not destroyed. No, I said, just rebuilt. Outside, the lights dimmed. The warehouse doors closed slowly. People drifted into the night, carrying pieces of something they hadn't had before. And for the first time since the restaurant, since the poison, since the truth, I felt something unexpected. Not relief, not pride, completion. I used to believe that endings announce themselves, that there would be a moment, Clear, dramatic, unmistakable. When everything finally settled and you could point to it and say, "This is where it ends." I know better now. Endings don't arrive with noise. They arrive quietly, disguised as ordinary days. The last chapter of my story didn't begin with a phone call or a confrontation. It began on a morning that looked like any other. Sunlight through the kitchen window. Coffee steaming in a mug I'd chipped years ago. The sound of birds arguing over something unimportant. I stood there longer than necessary, doing nothing at all, and realized something had changed. I wasn't waiting anymore. Not for an apology. Not for redemption. Not for proof that I'd been right. The waiting was gone. That was how I knew I was finally free. The foundation no longer needed me the way it once had. It had grown a spine. Systems, people, values that didn't bend just because money or pressure showed up. I attended fewer meetings, gave fewer opinions, watched others make decisions I would have once insisted on controlling. Letting go felt natural. One afternoon, the board surprised me with something small and unnecessary, a framed photograph from the first exhibition. No plaque, no title, just an image of artists standing together in a renovated warehouse, light pouring in from high windows. On the back, they had written a single line. This happened because someone chose integrity over inheritance. I didn't hang it in my office. I put it in the hallway at home where only I would see it. Ethan didn't vanish from my life, but he stopped orbiting it. He came when he came. He left when he left. No expectations on either side. Sometimes weeks passed without a word. Sometimes he stopped by just to help me fix something, eat a meal, talk about nothing important. He never asked for money, never hinted, never circled old ground. That restraint mattered more than anything he could have said. One evening, while we were repairing a loose step on the porch, he spoke without looking at me. "I still think about that night," he said. I tightened the bolt, nodded. "So do I." "I used to replay it differently," he continued. "In my version, you either forgave me immediately or destroyed me completely." I straightened slowly. Those were the only outcomes you understood. He met my eyes then. Yeah, I didn't understand the third one. Neither did I admitted. He smiled faintly. "I do now." That was enough. The house changed as the years went on. Not dramatically. Gradually. I gave away furniture I no longer needed. Cleared closets. Simplified rooms. It wasn't downsizing, it was distilling, removing things that belonged to an earlier version of myself who thought accumulation equaled safety. I kept what mattered. Books with notes in the margins. Marianne's paintings. Photographs that still made me feel something. Everything else found new homes, including the photograph Ethan once sent, the one from the motel steps. I burned it one evening in the fireplace. Not out of anger. Out of closure. That image no longer represented who either of us was. On my 70th birthday, I didn't throw a party. I spent the day alone by choice. I drove to the coast, walked the shoreline, listened to the waves argue with the rocks the way they always had. I thought about the company I'd built, the son I'd raised, the woman I'd loved, the life I'd nearly lost. And I thought about the moment everything turned. Not the poison, not the meeting, not the signatures, but the instant I chose myself. That was the real pivot, the point of no return. Choosing life doesn't always mean choosing comfort. Sometimes it means choosing clarity and accepting the cost. I sat on a driftwood log until sunset and felt no loneliness at all. Months later, Ethan called me with news. "I got certified," he said. "Project management. Took a while." "That's an accomplishment," I said. There was pride in his voice, not borrowed, not inflated. "Earned. I wanted you to hear it from me," he added. "Not because I need approval. Just because you're my father." The word landed gently this time. "I'm glad you told me," I said when the call ended. I didn't sit in silence replaying it. I didn't analyze his tone or wonder what it meant for the future. I trusted the present. That was new. As years passed, people stopped asking me about the sale, the betrayal, the scandal that never quite became public. They asked different questions. How did you know when to walk away? How did you survive something like that? What would you do differently? I always gave the same answer. I stopped confusing love with obligation. Some nodded, some didn't understand. That was fine. Understanding comes when you're ready for it. One quiet evening, sitting alone in the living room, I realized I hadn't thought about revenge in a very long time. Not even indirectly. It had lost all relevance. What I'd done wasn't about punishment. It was about alignment. About refusing to let my final years be shaped by someone else's hunger. I hadn't won. I had stepped aside and let truth do its work. And truth, unlike anger, doesn't need constant maintenance. The last time Ethan and I spoke before the story ends, he said something that stayed with me. You know, he said, "For a long time, I thought money was the only thing that made people listen. I waited. Now I think it's consistency," he continued. "You didn't shout. You didn't chase. You just held your ground." I smiled to myself. "That's because ground is easier to defend than illusions," I said. He laughed softly. "I'm still learning that. Aren't we all? I don't know how much time I have left. None of us do. But I know this. I wake up without fear. I sleep without regret. And the life I live now is mine. Fully, honestly, and without apology. The company is gone. The money has a purpose bigger than bloodlines. The son I raised is finally building something real. And I am no longer defined by what was taken from me, but by what I refuse to give away. If this story taught me anything, it's this. A legacy isn't what survives you. It's what doesn't need you anymore. And that is how it should be. If you stayed until the end, thank you. Stories like this don't spread through noise. They spread through recognition. If this resonated with you, take a moment to support the channel. Share where you're watching from and pass this story along to someone who might need it. Some lessons arrive late, but they arrive exactly when they're meant to.